Hello everyone, and welcome to the Learning Objective number 1 video for topic 3.1, which is contracts general. What we're going to talk about here is what do we mean by the term contract. Now remember, these videos are not complete lectures. They're not designed that way. They're short summaries of the lecture that I'll be giving in the non-blended class, but they're designed as a supplement to the material on the Sakai site. So make sure that you're self-studying the Sakai site in addition to watching this video. Okay, so this is, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to move myself up here over top of the logo. Okay, so what do we mean by a contract? Well, a contract is an agreement between people, more than one person, for some sort of a transaction. But the reason I have this slide here is to remember that the term contract is used in other ways. So for our example, it's this first one, a written or spoken agreement. Let me get my pointer. The written or spoken agreement. This first one here is the one we're using. But remember that the term also can be used as a verb. So, and it can be used for things other than the legal version. So for example, it can refer to the property of some tangible item. So in this case, glass contracts as it cools. Well, that doesn't mean it's engaging in a transaction. It means it's getting smaller. And then you can also use the legal version as a verb, and you can use it to describe the entering into. So for example, here it says the local authority will contract with a wide range of agencies. So that refers to the same thing, but when we talk about a contract, we are talking about the noun. Okay. This is a lot of words on the screen that you don't really need to see. You don't need to read it all. This is out of the Black's Law Dictionary. So there's a whole separate dictionary just for law terms called Black's Law Dictionary. And I put this up here to show all the different ways that that courts have and that statutes have described the term contract. You can sort of read through these if you want to, but some of the key terms that we'll be talking about, and you'll see this later, you see this term consideration popping up a lot. We're going to talk about that in the learning objective that deals with the formation of a contract. Okay. So here's the key learning item or concept check that I want to focus on for this video. When we talk about a legal contract, what we're really talking about is an agreement for an exchange of promises. And the reason you see the Starbucks logo over here is I wanted to prove the point, or make the point, that when you go to buy a coffee at Starbucks, the actual moment that you order the coffee and before you get it, you have agreed, you've made a promise to pay, and they've made a promise to produce the product. So it's an exchange of promises at that moment. That's actually a form of an oral agreement. And then you pay, and then you expect to receive your product for what you paid for. So the reality is we engage in these contractual arrangements all day, every day in our daily lives, but we don't always write them down. But just because we don't write them down doesn't mean it's not an enforceable promise. So if you were to pay for your coffee at Starbucks and they didn't deliver it to you, they're breaching a contract to produce the coffee for what you paid for. What that means is that every party to a contract has some obligation. So in the Starbucks example, the customer has an obligation to pay, and Starbucks has an obligation to produce the product. So it's an exchange of promises that creates an obligation. And the only real difference fundamentally between something like buying coffee and taking out a 30-year mortgage on your house is just the time that it takes for performance. It's still fundamentally an exchange of promises, but those promises span a much, much larger time frame, and there's a lot more money involved in mortgage usually than buying a cup of coffee. But the point is, that in my mortgage, I won't pay it off for 30 years. So that means that contract exists for a really long time, and the time for performance is for decades, whereas the time between the obligation to perform and the performance in a Starbucks, ordering a cup of coffee at Starbucks, is a few minutes. And so in that case, we don't take the time to write it down. We don't need to. But in the case of a mortgage, we would obviously write that down. We're going to come back to consideration, but just for now, all contracts have to have it. And what that means, what that term refers to, is the bargain for exchange. What exactly are the promises that are being exchanged? Do they both have value? Because if they don't, then we don't have a contract. All contracts have to have some form of consideration. We'll talk about that in the third video, in the formation video. And then the last one is that it has to be enforceable by law, because you could have a valid contract that meets all of the other requirements for a contract, but if you can't enforce it in a court, it doesn't really have any value. And there could be several reasons why a contract isn't enforced in a court. One, it could be for something illegal, in which case you could go through all the formalities of forming a contract, but it was still going to be illegal to perform it, so it's not enforceable by the courts. And the other example, most common example, is that it just could simply be not provable. So an oral contract, for example, might meet all of the requirements for a contract, for a valid contract, but it's not enforceable because its terms can't be proven. So, so when you think about what is a contract, it is an exchange of promises that creates obligations in both directions that vary based on the time of performance and involve some sort of value exchange, that's consideration, and that can be enforced by the courts. So those are the elements of the definition of a contract. Okay, and then this video, I'm not going to show it here because I posted it on Sakai, but in the video, Lucy, of course, pulls the football up from Charlie Brown, which she does every time, the running gag in Charlie Brown comic strips, but she has a contract that says she's not going to do that, but she violates it anyway. And the slide here asks this question: is it illegal to do that? And the fact is that it's not illegal to breach a contract. But what a contract does do, the reason it has value, is it gives the non-breaching party a remedy, a right to go to the court and ask for the contract to be enforced or for damages to be paid. So that is what we mean by the term contract. Okay, that's it for this first video. I'll see you in the learning objective number 2 video. Thanks.